What's up YouTube? Today's video I'm going to be bringing you the 200 DPS Spark Inquisitor profile that I saw yesterday while I was looking through profiles on stream. And I do think that this video will help people understand a lot more how aura stackers get all their damage. Now I think this is a pretty min-max aura stacker that you're seeing right here doing the fear at 281% quant. But I do think that this is an Ascendant and is not actually Inquisitor, and this guy probably does not have the same gear level. But does it really matter with Spark and Invitations because everything just completely melts. I think this guy's profile is probably like a quarter of this person's will be reviewing's damage, but as you can see, it just obliterates everything. So what about aura stackers have changed? Aura stackers have greatly changed in the last 2 leagues, and the main change is it has moved from the cookie cutter archetype of Shavs and Lowlife to Petrified Blood and no Shavs. Now this is a pretty big change because Shavs build is a lot different and it's a lot less diversity than saying someone just using a body armor. The body armor has a lot more options. You can use a Redeemer aura effect chest. You can use Global Defense Fractured. You can get suppression on the chest. You can even go Covenant if you really wanted to, and there's so many different variations of aura stacker. Or you can just use a straight up astral play if you're on a real budget. Now, right now, aura stackers have a pretty big diversity in terms of ascendancies, and that is because Ascendant is no longer the cookie cutter choice. It is pretty hard to get 300% aura effect, and 300% aura effect actually makes a pretty big difference in the past because it allows you to get a lot of physical damage reduction from Guardian and a lot of cast speed from Necromancer. But nowadays, it's incredibly hard to get 300% aura effectiveness, meaning that Champion getting 30% aura effectiveness makes it a really, really good budget choice. And Occultist and Inquisitor are also not too bad if you have the gear because it gives you a lot of damage on the Ascendancy. And Ascendant is pretty much just there as a jack of all trades. It's also very good primarily nowadays because of the extra passive points you get. And the extra passive points make a pretty big difference. But the passive points also have diminishing returns now because you can't really get the medium cluster jewels of aura effect. So you're pretty much left with just taking jewels that give you a lot of multi. And the damage has greatly increased with recombinators, and I can't stress this enough. The damage has actually gone through the roof purely because of level 4 empowered gloves, which is pretty much like 3 extra gem levels on Spark. And you can also get Amulet with Eldritch Implicit. So if we look at this guy's Amulet later on, you will see this Amulet is cracked. It's much better than Ashes of the Star. Unfortunately for everyone, you cannot mirror it because it is corrupted, because it is made through Recombinator. So you can see here, this thing actually has 2 skill gem levels, and the gloves have 3 skill gem levels. So that's already 5 skill gems on Spark, and that is an insane amount of damage. As you can see here, the top end has greatly increased. This side is from Arch Nemesis League, and this side is from Sentinel League. So you can see it's a vast increase in damage. And you can kind of already see this. Like, say if you raise Spark, so right now this profile is at 200 mil. You raise it by 6 gem levels, and you can see it's already gone up by like 15-20%. So it's a huge damage increase. It also allows you to get crit multi. And it is definitely one of the best builds in the game for invitations and simulacrum farming. And a nice part about aura stackers now is there's actually budget options. If you actually go on PoE Ninja, you will see that there's a lot of people running Leadership's Price or Secrets of Suffering, and that allows you to cap out your crit. And aura stackers do have a hard time getting 100% crit without some sort of investment, and Secrets of Suffering kind of solves that. So in order to understand why the damage is so high, we have to see where skill gems always get their base damage from. So if you watch these previous videos, you will know that I always go through the same method of analyzing how someone gets so much damage. Well, for a spell like Spark, all of your levels or base damage usually comes from the skill gem level, the Smite, and Wrath aura. So what you can see here is that Smite gives a bit of damage here, 1706 flat damage. And then Smite is something that every single time you hit a mob, you get a buff that lasts for a bit. You can see here, Smite is linked to Awaken in Power. It's in the helm, and it has +1, +2, +2, +1. Those 6 gem levels, and then you can see here Smite right here is probably extremely high level. I forgot how high it is. It's probably like over 30. It is actually 34. Holy moly, that's a high spike. The Smite gets a bunch of base damage. And then you also get the Spark level, which is also level 28 because of the amulet and from the level 4 in power. So you can see here it's actually 28, which is actually just crazy. And then the flat lightning damage from the aura, which also gets scaled by aura effectiveness. Now, all of that base damage has to get scaled somehow, and the base damage is scaled. You can see here 728% lightning, 672% cold damage, and that is from Nebulous. What Nebulous actually does is it gives you 20% increased cold damage per 1% cold res over 75%, and that also applies for lightning damage. And since we have 90% fire, cold, and lightning res, that means we have 600% or 300% cold damage and 300% lightning damage on each Nebulous. So that is pretty much where aura stackers get all of their base damage scaling from, and they also get a little bit generically from just the Nebulous spell damage, the faster projectiles gem, and then just some spell damage nodes on the tree, but majority of it does come from Nebulous. Now you also want a lot of more damage scaling, because more damage scaling is also really important because it is a multiplier. And more damage mainly comes from all of the auras. You have Wrath, which is a more damage, more lightning damage scaling. Hatred, which is more cold damage scaling. Zealotry, which is more spell damage scaling. Pain Attunement, which is just 30% more spell damage. And then you also have a Righteous Fire in a level 5 in power, which should also make a super high level because of the helmet again. And you can see here, Righteous Fire is level 29. And that gives a lot of more damage also. So in total, you actually end up getting, I think on this build, it says 324% more damage. And that is an insane amount of damage that gets scaled. And a lot of this also is because the skill is a conversion skill. So for aura stackers, you almost always want a physical skill that gets converted to lightning or a lightning skill. And the reason behind that is you can take advantage of the fact that Wrath gives you more lightning damage, and then all of that damage gets converted over to cold damage we call the Brotherhood, and then it gets scaled by Hatred Aura, which gives you more cold damage. So that's why it's so important for aura stacker skills to be lightning damage instead of cold or fire damage because of the way that conversion works. Now, you have all of this damage, but you still need to have a lot of cast speed or attack speed, and you actually get a significant amount of cast speed because of this pair of gloves. These pair of gloves have 16% more attack and cast speed, and that actually makes a huge difference. So you have 9.93 or actually 10.08 cast speed from the cast speed modifier on gloves. And you do have a 100% critical strike chance because you get 3.5% base crit on these gloves. So you can see these gloves are insane, and this guy actually owns the original copy of these gloves. So you have 3.5% critical strike chance. And you also run Precision Aura, which actually gives you a huge amount of crit when it's at level 20. And with all of that aura effectiveness, and Zealotry also gives you a lot of aura, a lot of spell crit. And he also runs Bottle Fave, and without Bottle Fave, he's at 87% crit. So there's a lot of sources of crit for him to reach 100% crit without relying on Secrets of Suffering or something like that. And the big thing for this profile and why it's so much DPS compared to other profiles is it has 768% multi. Now, this is a crazy amount of multi. In fact, it's so high that I almost wonder if he had Socrates spells are supported by faster casting, if it would be more damage. Because I do think that more cast speed would feel better to play with. So that'll be an interesting thing to see if it's actually more damage that way. I'm not entirely sure. But you can see here, he gets a lot of crit damage pretty much because he uses 4 1 passive point voices. Now what 4 1 passive point voices does is it allows him to use a lot of gems. And gems you can see here, each one of these gems are quad multi or triple multi. Or this one's double multi, is triple multi life. And there's another triple multi life, triple multi life. And here's another quad multi-jewel. So you pretty much get the point. Double multi, reservation efficiency, and 2 forbidden flesh jewels and flame. So he gets a bunch of multi because he's running so many triple and quad multi-jewels. Now he also pretty much gets a free damage link if you look here. His Awakened Spell Echo, Arcane Surge, and Inspiration. Now, you might be wondering, where does this penetration come from, because he has no penetration on his gear or skill gems. Well, he gets all of his penetration he needs for Inevitable Judgment, which is critical strikes, ignore enemy monster and elemental resistances, and that allows you to invest in a lot of points elsewhere, so it's a huge benefit. And the biggest thing about this build and why it also does so much damage is it has so much aura effectiveness that you don't usually see, from body armor, introspections, militant faith, helmet, and amulet. So usually people don't run a Vol Regalia that's influence, but here he actually has 30% increased effective non-curse auras, and he also has a frenzy charge on hit, which also helps out a lot. His 15% increased effective non-curse auras on his helmet, and his amulet actually ends up having 20 plus 16, 36% increased effective non-curse auras. And this is pretty much a once-in-a-lifetime amulet. And 36% increased effective non-curse auras pretty much makes Ashes of the Star look like a joke. Now, this amulet is pretty much made from, I think you make the base from turning in the amulets to the vendor that you get from, I don't even know what it is from, Uber Elder, or is it Uber Shaper, or is it some other boss? I don't really remember, but it is a boss that Waggle designed the unique for, and it turns out the best use of his unique is to vendor it to get the amulet. But basically, this build has an insane amount of aura effectiveness that you normally don't really see from aura stackers. It is incredibly hard to get 300%. And for Militant Faith, you get 1% increase of effective non-curse auras per 10 devotion. He's able to get a lot of devotion because he's using Unnatural Instinct here to take a bunch of points and allocate them with just using one jewel socket. So overall, you can see here that this build has really good synergy with the aura effectiveness, with all of the flat damage scaling, all of the increased modifiers and the more damage modifiers, and the cast speed, and the crit multi, and the penetration, so that he's able to get 200 DPS with Spark. Now, lastly, you might be wondering how much cheating is there, and this profile is kind of strange in that it actually has reverse cheating. When you import over the profile, it doesn't have two of the introspection jewels clusters allocated. I'm not really sure why, so that's why it shows up as 176 mil. But in reality, it's actually a 200 mil DPS profile, and you have to manually input the 6 points for the small passive clusters. So I'm not really sure why this is the case. Now, it also has enough mana reservation and life reservation left over, so you can see here it's 27% unreserved life and 16 unreserved mana, making it so that he can actually cast his spells. And there's no additional skills that are unrealistic to cast. Everyone uses these skills for Aura Stacker. Only thing that you'll have to cast is Smite. Only thing that is kind of crazy is Sniper's Mark, but you will still cast Sniper's Mark on bosses. But let's be real, with this amount of damage, the boss is going to be long dead before you're actually able to cast Sniper's Mark. And this build is actually not fully cheating in the sense that it does still take a skill duration cluster, and skill duration doesn't really show up as damage on PoE Ninja, because the way that Spark works is that it has the duration modifier and how long the Spark lasts for, and the Spark can hit the enemy multiple times depending on how long the duration is. So the only real cheating, and this is pretty much nitpicking at its extreme, is that instead of Haste Aura, he could be running Malevolence. And Malevolence should potentially be a lot more damage because it would take his duration over to extreme levels. So let's say you ran Malevolence, and even though your damage goes down to 166 mil, you can see here that the Spark duration goes to 4.554 seconds. From, what is it without Malevolence? From 3.2. So that's pretty much like almost like 50% more damage in ideal scenarios, but Haste will feel a lot better to play. And this character is still an extremely tanky character, and that's pretty much because of his regen. It has 2.2k life, and we'll go over into how he's able to reserve so much of his life soon. And he also has a bunch of energy shield, and his energy shield has 923 regen, and his net life regen is still 923. So overall, he's recovering 2500 HP per second, and he also has incredible defenses with 76k armor, 58k evasion, and 90% all res, and he even has some chaos resist. So this is the first ever profile I've reviewed that his damage is underrepresented by PoE Ninja and PoB. And Inquisitor is an amazing choice because of the Forbidden Flame and Flesh jewels. What these jewels do is that it converts 90% of your damage taken from, what's it called? From chaos damage to fire damage and lightning damage. And that pretty much means that you have 90% chaos res for 90% of the chaos damage you actually end up taking. So that means that this guy can reserve a bunch of his life, and there's not really that much chaos damage in the game. And a lot of these builds are squishy because of degens on the ground, but this build has an insane amount of recovery, making it so that Inquisitor might be a dark horse candidate for ore stackers. So I might try out an Inquisitor ore stacking Spark in the future to see its potential. As you can see here, I've collected pretty much one of every Ascendancy class, so I might be making Inquisitor next. And I think I'm missing Champion also, and Shadow. So those are some maybe future league goals if I keep playing the league. And I do think that the big tech for this build is definitely the amulet that you can't really make, but you can mirror the gloves, which are super crazy. Only knock on these gloves is that it's not level 25 faster proj. And also the fact that I think level 25 faster casting will feel better than multi if you stack this much multi, but I'm not 100% sure. But we can actually just test it out real fast, right? Just because I'm curious. So for these gloves, we will see here. It probably won't be better. I'm actually probably just completely dumb. You see here, you actually lose 11.7% DPS. And on these gloves, you add modifier, suffix, faster, casting, elevated, shaping, and save. Yeah, it's actually more damage, and it will feel a lot better to play. So if you can see here, if you turn haste on, it'll be at 205 million, and the previous version of these gloves was at 197 million, and it's at 11.89 cast speed. So if anyone wants to make these gloves, it is probably the best option, and it hasn't been made yet. So that's something that fun that someone could do potentially. And if you really want to tooltip warrior it, you can also use level, I think, slower projectiles instead of +2 gems, and it should be more damage. But I do think that faster casting will feel a lot better than the multi if you have this gear level, since when you're at like 700% multi, each percent of multi has a diminishing return. And this also demonstrates the power of skills having elemental tags like this. You can see you have lightning and elemental, and it gives you, allow you to have a lot more multi because you can use some quad multi jewels. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this was a pretty good breakdown of ore stackers and how they get their damage and why Sentinel is so crazy for them, and how you can have different ascendancies shine if you have the gear level for it. But I do think that this is probably one of the better profiles that I've reviewed in terms of PoE Ninja DPS that is very real world and will feel really fun to play. But this guy's gear is probably worth mirrors upon mirrors. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more mirrors, exalts, and mage plus than me, and see you next time. Bye.